Hi everybody, Dan here. I want to go over both the pro and the con of servant leadership. And I'm going to be scrolling down two articles. One addresses the con, you can tell by the title, why servant leadership is a bad idea. And the other article addresses the pro, why servant leadership is a good idea. So we'll begin with the con. And the author says that even though servant leadership, I'm going to paraphrase some of this, is still a fairly popular leadership theory, it needs to be derailed. It's a bad idea because it's paternalistic and gets in the way of employee engagement. And he says just when we need to empower frontline knowledge workers to think for themselves and to take more ownership, the last thing they need is to be served by their managers. And he refers to the John F. Kennedy quote, President Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Implying that, the paraphrase, ask not what your organization can do for you, but what you can do for the organization. So this is counter servant leadership. He says the concept is interesting, but it is false. Why? Because in business, managers at all levels must serve the owners if they want to keep their jobs. They also need to serve the customers. The harsh reality in business is that employees are a means to an end. Effective managers will, of course, do all they can to engage, motivate, consider, and include employees, but that does not amount to being their servant. Now, this is an important point, because many proponents of servant leadership offer up two choices. Either you're an autocratic dictator or you're a servant leadership. That's a false choice. You can be a path goal leader, you can be a LMX leader, you can be a situational leader, and be totally engaged with your employees without being their servant. The truth is that while managers fire employees who aren't performing, no servant can fire his master. Therefore, this sense of servant leadership is interesting but clearly false. I don't know if it's clearly false, but he does raise a good point. If you have the power and sometimes the obligation to fire an employee, how can a servant fire his or her master? So that kind of pulls the rug out from servant leadership, according to the author. He also says that servant leadership is too paternalistic. And he talks about transactional analysis. There's a whole chapter of this in our book on psychology of leadership. But in a nutshell, transactional analysis talks about relationships in terms of the parent and the child and the adult. Parent, child, and adult. And transactional analysis suggests that the best relationships in life are adult to adult, not parent to child. And he says servant leadership, okay, the pop psychology theory, transactional analysis, compared parent-child to adult-adult relationships. Serving employees, again, being a servant leader, smacks of a parent-child relationship, which, if employees feel so treated, they will surely be even more demotivated and disengaged than they are already. From the point of view of TA, transactional analysis, proponents of servant leadership are really just switching from the critical parent to the nurturing parent. So the critical parent would be the autocratic dictator leader. The nurturing parent would be the supportive leader. But the result is still paternalistic. It's still parent-child. It's not adult-adult. And that is what he recommends. So again, he refers to the John F. Kennedy quote as really the way to go. Not servant leadership, but the traditional service to your boss, your manager, and to your customer. Not the other way around. This approach is more empowering and shows more respect to employees than the paternalistic servant leader stance. The bottom line: managers who position themselves to their teams as their servants one day and then discipline them or fire them the next invite cynicism and distrust. I mean, look at your own experience in the workplace. Does this not ring a bell? The old adage, actions speak louder than words, could not be truer for managers. Being on stage, they are closely watched for any disconnect between word and deed. That's true. As a leader, you are always being watched by your people. The notion of serving employees sounds good at the keep it simple level, but it's hard to maintain in leaner times. Fortunately, it is fully possible to develop a collaborative, supportive, empathetic, engaging, empowering, and developmental relationship with employees without taking on the extreme servant label. So he makes a pretty good point, I think. And he ends it, employee engagement requires an adult relationship between managers and employees, not the parent-child paternalistic relationship. All right, so it's interesting. It doesn't destroy the theory, but it does challenge the theory. Now, here's a gentleman who is saying that it really does work. And he refers to a study that he did with the United Kingdom, in other words, English, British food delivery service, in which things were not going well. The engagement of the drivers who delivered the milk and the bread to millions of customers was really dipping. Everybody was becoming very, very demotivated because management was cracking the whip. It was metric driven. And I've been in organizations that have been metric driven, and all they cared about was reducing costs, increasing performance. And then if you did a good job, they cracked the whip even harder the next week. And this gentleman found that what management was doing was not inspiring on any level to either party. And eventually the drivers, many of whom had worked for the companies for decades, became resentful. So this is not good. This is low morale. It could lead to turnover. It could lead to poor performance. And the author states that the top-down leadership model management was using, the autocratic, cracking the whip, dictatorial model, is outdated. Now again, the author is putting up a straw man here, because this does not mean the only choice is servant leadership. There are lots of ways to engage your employees without being their servant. However, we'll continue with his argument. The key then is to help people feel purposeful, motivated, and energized so they can bring their best selves to work. To put it bluntly, servant leaders have the humility, courage, and insight to admit that they can benefit from the expertise of others who have less power than they. They actively seek the ideas and unique contributions of the employees that they serve. And the idea of the servant leadership, creating an environment where people can be more innovative, trying out their own ideas. And this is what they did with that United Kingdom delivery team. Management tried a new format for its weekly performance meetings with the drivers. Instead of cracking the whip, managers asked, "How can I help you deliver excellent service?" Now, at first, the drivers were, I'm summarizing, at first the drivers were skeptical about this. Now, maybe you have had a similar experience. But management kept asking that question. And then some drivers started to offer suggestions. One suggested a new product. One thought of a new way to report shortages so that the customer was never left with an empty order. Small changes created a virtuous cycle. As the drivers got credit, this is important, the drivers got credit for their ideas and saw them put into place. They became energized to offer more ideas. And the author concludes what it comes down to is this: employees who do the actual work of your organization often know better than you how to do a great job. And he emphasizes creating a low-risk environment for employees to think of new ideas. Low risk meaning if those new ideas don't work, they're not punished for it. Because you cannot encourage innovation with a cookie in one hand and cracking the whip in the other. So this is a case where servant leadership did work. And I think there's an argument for both sides, and I wanted to present it to you. So this is the end of this screencast, and I'll see you in the next screencast. Thanks. Bye-bye now.